What if I told you that everything you call failure, shame, or mistake is precisely what's pushing you forward? Yes, most people spend their entire lives trying to escape mistakes, hiding from them as if they were monsters ready to destroy any chance of success. But what almost no one realizes is that it's precisely there in the stumbles and failures that hurt the most that the key to growth lies. Alan Watts, one of the most daring thinkers of the last century, saw life as a flow, a constant movement. For him, there are no magic shortcuts or paths without falls. What exists are experiences, and within every mistake lies a piece of your next level. Now, think with me. What if every mistake you've made so far hadn't happened? Would you be the same person? Would you have learned what you know now? Would you have matured? The answer is obvious. Without them, you would never grow. What Watts advocated was simple and powerful. Stop fighting mistakes and start seeing them as allies. It's not about enjoying failure, but about understanding that failure is proof that you're trying, taking risks, and moving forward. In this video, I'll show you why mistakes aren't the end, but the fuel for your evolution. You'll understand once and for all how to transform every failure into strength, every stumble into learning, and how to stop being paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes. Get ready, because what you're about to hear here could turn your mind upside down and change the way you view everything that's ever gone wrong in your life. Now you've realized that mistakes aren't enemies, but rather a force that can truly transform your life. This content has opened your mind to the fact that every failure carries a powerful lesson, and this is already beginning to change the way you approach your own journey. It's only fair that this transformation also reaches others, which is why liking and subscribing to the channel is so important. You've already received this revelation. Now you can be the instrument that awakens many others as well. Mark this moment. Like, subscribe, and keep watching, because the next video will take you even deeper into this path of growth and freedom. You know, when you look back and remember a mistake that at the time seemed like the end of the world, but today you can even laugh or be thankful for it. That's what we're talking about here. Mistakes have a function most people overlook. They're teachers in disguise. Only instead of arriving with a blackboard and chalk, they appear in the form of stumbles, bad decisions, ill-considered words, failed business deals, and relationships that crumbled. And as painful as it may be at the time, it's there that lies hidden the lesson that no immediate victory could teach. Because let's be honest, it's in mistakes that we become mindful, that pride subsides a bit, that the mind opens space to ask itself, what could I have done differently? This question, in itself, is already a gateway to growth. Think about it. When you get it right the first time, what happens? You celebrate, feel good, but then quickly forget and move on. Now, when you make a mistake, it stays hammering away at you, nagging, almost like a pebble in your shoe, forcing you to change your way of walking. Is it uncomfortable? Definitely. But it's precisely this discomfort that keeps you from repeating the same mistake. Or rather, it's this discomfort that makes you seek a new way of acting. And this is where Alan Watts offers a powerful insight. Life isn't about collecting perfect hits. It's about experimenting, failing, learning, and trying again. It's a game of trial and error where each failure is a sign that you're in motion, in process, truly alive. We grow up hearing that making mistakes is bad. At school, every mistake on a test means a grade lower. At home, every mistake is grounds for reprimand. At work, making a mistake can cost you an opportunity. This creates a conditioning, fear of making mistakes. But fear paralyzes, and what Watts said is that there is no growth within paralysis. If you don't allow yourself to make mistakes, you'll never allow yourself to take risks. And if you don't take risks, you'll spend your entire life inside the same comfortable but limited bubble. Now look how curious this is. Precisely the mistakes you fear so much are what will open new doors in your life. Think about a relationship that went wrong. It may have been painful at the time, but it was the one that showed you what you no longer accept. Think about a failed project. It was the one that taught you to plan better or to be more resilient. Even the silliest mistakes, like saying something without thinking, teach you to be more careful and to understand people better. What's more, making mistakes also exposes your humanity. Who hasn't failed? Who hasn't said something stupid, made a bad decision, or made a rash choice? When you understand that to err is human, you lift a huge weight. You stop demanding perfection from yourself, and start seeing yourself as someone constantly learning. This is exactly what Alan Watts wanted to show. Life is a flow, not static. And in this flow, mistakes are waves that sometimes knock you down, but also teach you how to swim better. The problem is that many people, when they fall, prefer not to get back in the water. They prefer to hide, blame themselves, give up. And that's when life stops. I want you to reflect a little now. What was the biggest mistake you ever made that ended up changing your life for the better? Write the word in the comments "apprenticeship" to mark this moment. Because when you share, you not only reinforce the lesson for yourself, but you also help others realize they're not alone on this journey. And it's precisely this exchange that makes the process of making mistakes much easier. After all, making mistakes is inevitable, but suffering alone doesn't have to be. The most interesting thing is that the more you resist seeing mistakes as teachers, the more they repeat themselves. Have you noticed that? It seems like life has a way of insisting on the same point until you learn. It's as if to say, you still don't get it, so I'll send it again. But when you change your perspective and decide to learn, the mistake stops being a punishment and becomes a tool, and this is liberating, because suddenly fear loses its power. You start taking more risks, speaking more, acting more, without the weight of that absurd demand to be perfect. And ironically, the more you take risks, the more you grow. It's almost as if life is waiting for you to accept the mistake to unlock the next phase. Now think about something. How many incredible things have you stopped yourself from doing because you were afraid of making mistakes? How many opportunities have you passed up because you convinced yourself you weren't ready? How many dreams have you shelved because you thought you might fail? Alan Watts would put it simply, living trying to avoid making mistakes is the same as not living at all. You already understand that mistakes teach you, but there's one detail that makes it all even more powerful. Now that you understand that mistakes are an invisible teacher always trying to teach you something, it's time to go a step further and face the big question. Why are you so afraid of making mistakes? Think about it. From childhood, we're conditioned to believe that mistakes are a negative mark. At school, they show up in red on tests. At home, they can lead to scolding or comparisons with someone who got it right. At work, they can be seen as incompetence. This environment makes you grow up believing that making mistakes is synonymous with failure, when in fact they're just a sign of trying, of movement, of life happening. And the curious thing is that this fear doesn't just come from outside. It takes up residence within you. It's that voice that says, better not to risk it. What if it goes wrong? But this voice, which seems to be protecting you, is actually a prison. The fear of making mistakes prevents you from experimenting, from daring, from discovering how far you can go. It's like wanting to learn to swim without ever getting into the water to avoid drowning. Does it make sense? No. And this is exactly the trap Alan Watts denounced. Society creates the illusion that living well means avoiding mistakes, when the truth is just the opposite. Growth lies in risk. It's in risk that you find self-improvement, courage, and innovation. Without taking risks, you might avoid some falls, but you'll also avoid any chance of overcoming yourself. Now, let me ask you a direct question. How many times have you held back from taking action because you were afraid of making a mistake? How many opportunities have passed you by, and you've chosen to back away because you didn't want to face the possibility of failure? This fear isn't just a detail. It shapes your life, limits your paths, and often you don't even realize it. It's as if you're being guided by an invisible leash. And the curious thing is that this fear isn't natural. It was planted within you. In other words, if it was planted, it can also be uprooted. And this is where Watts's vision is liberating. He said that there is no full life without accepting failure as an inevitable part of the process. Think about it. When you make a mistake, your immediate reaction is to feel ashamed, to hide, to try to erase it from your memory. But what if you looked at the mistake differently? What if instead of shame you felt curiosity? What is this mistake trying to show me? What haven't I realized about myself or the situation? This simple shift in perspective can break the power of fear. Because fear doesn't disappear when you run from it. It only loses its power when you face it head on. And when you start seeing the mistake as part of the game, fear begins to lose its function. I want you to comment below the word courage to mark this point in our conversation. Because admitting that you're afraid of making mistakes, but that you're willing to face them, is already an act of courage. And believe me, there are thousands of people living trapped in the same fear as you. When you write, you inspire, and when you inspire, you help break this cycle. Remember, this channel is a space for exchange. It's not about being alone with your mistakes. And here's the most interesting part. When you begin to understand that the fear of making mistakes is just a social and mental construct, you realize you can deconstruct it. And from there, what seemed impossible begins to become feasible. That idea that it won't work loses strength, and in its place emerges a new thought. I can try. But there's an even deeper detail that completely transforms this relationship with mistakes, and that's what we'll talk about next. By now, you've realized that mistakes are a master in disguise, and that the fear of making mistakes only exists because it was instilled within you. But now comes the part that can truly change the game. Understanding that every mistake is actually an opportunity for growth. And when I say growth, I'm not talking about an abstract or distant idea, but about concrete changes that shape your life. Think about it. Every time you failed, something changed in your behavior. You may not have noticed it at the time, but it was a mistake that taught you to be more cautious, more creative, more resilient, or even more courageous. Nothing teaches you as much as a stumble, because it's what forces you to rethink your path and find new solutions. A simple example. Remember when you were learning something new, like riding a bike or driving? Mistakes were inevitable. You fell, got tangled up, felt insecure, but it was precisely there, in that fall, that the learning truly kicked in. You may have read about balance or heard instructions, but it was only when you made a mistake, got up and tried again that you truly learned. And isn't that the case with almost everything in life? Relationships, business, friendships, choices? Mistakes aren't obstacles that block you, but rather steps that propel you upward. There's just one catch. Many people make mistakes and stop. The secret is understanding that every failure carries a hidden message, and those who can decipher that message grow faster and stronger. This is where Alan Watts comes in with a perspective that may seem uncomfortable at first, but makes perfect sense. He said that failure is a sign of movement, and that without this movement, there is no evolution. You can remain safe in small successes, but the real leap only happens when you face the risk of failing at something big. Failure opens doors because it forces you to reinvent yourself. Without error, there is no change. Without change, there is no progress. Watts believed that failure was a kind of reminder from life, saying, you still have room to go further. And when you start to see failure from this perspective, even the most painful moments take on new meaning. Now, look how this directly connects to your life. Think about a bad choice that hurt, but later brought something better. Maybe that job you lost that made way for another much more aligned with you. Maybe that relationship that ended and showed you what you truly deserve in a partnership. Maybe even that financial decision that went wrong and made you learn to manage things better. At the time, the feeling is of loss, but what comes after is learning, maturity, and preparation for greater things. And this isn't theory. It's something you've already experienced. That's why I want you to comment below on the word growth to make this point. This way, you reinforce to yourself that your mistakes weren't in vain, and you also help others who read this and are inspired by your courage to admit that you learned from your failures. The most powerful thing about all this is that when you accept that mistakes carry opportunities, the weight begins to lift. Instead of feeling guilty, you begin to feel curious. Instead of paralyzing, you begin to move. Mistakes cease to be an enemy and become tools. And this generates enormous freedom because you no longer need to hide, trying to be perfect, avoiding any risky steps. You understand that making mistakes is a natural part of the process, and that each failure is a chance to become better than you were yesterday. But there's an even more transformative step on this path. It's not enough to accept mistakes. You must learn to love them. And that's exactly what we'll talk about next. It's time to talk about something that, at first glance, may sound strange. Learning to love your mistakes. Accepting them is already a step forward. Understanding that they teach us lessons is already liberating. But loving them is the turning point that truly changes everything. And when I say love, I don't mean romanticizing failure or enjoying suffering, but rather seeing mistakes as such an important ally that you begin to value each failure as an essential part of your story. Think about it. If mistakes are the teachers that shape you, why continue treating them as enemies? Loving mistakes means stopping fighting them and starting to use them as fuel. How many times have you found yourself dwelling on a mistake for days, weeks, or even years, carrying that weight like a shameful scar? Now imagine if instead you looked at that same mistake and said, "Thank you, because it was through you that I learned." This simple shift in attitude doesn't erase what happened, but it transforms your relationship with the past. It's like taking a stone out of your backpack and realizing you can walk much lighter. Loving a mistake is giving it its rightful place, not as something that holds you back, but as something that frees you. Alan Watts said that life isn't meant to be controlled, but to be lived in flux, and mistakes are part of that flux. The problem is that many people want a perfect path, without flaws or setbacks, and that path simply doesn't exist. What exists is the dance between successes and failures, and the sooner you understand that this dance is natural, the sooner you'll feel free to truly live. Loving mistakes is recognizing that they are part of your development. What's more, it's understanding that without them, you wouldn't have become who you are today. Now I want to challenge you. What was the mistake that made you grow the most? The one that hurt, but turned into the greatest learning experience of your life. Write the word in the comment strength and share it with us. Because when you put it out there, you not only reinforce how much you've grown, but you also inspire others who are still stuck in guilt and regret. This exchange is powerful because it shows that no one is alone on this journey. And there's a very important detail. Loving your mistakes also means not being paralyzed by them. It's looking forward, knowing that each failure doesn't define who you are, but rather who you're becoming. It's the awareness that making mistakes is part of life, but what really matters is what you do with what you've learned. When you love your mistakes, fear fades, courage grows, and freedom emerges. You're no longer held hostage by perfectionism or the opinions of others. You simply live, try, fail, learn, and move on. And it's in this process that true maturity lies. But there's a deeper dimension to this conversation, something that goes beyond acceptance and love for mistakes. Because when you start seeing mistakes this way, the question inevitably arises, what does this mean for your personal and spiritual evolution? And that's exactly where we come in next. Now that you understand that loving your mistakes changes the way you see life, it's time to delve even deeper and realize how they are the true path to maturity. This is perhaps the most challenging part, because it's not enough to accept that mistakes happen or simply be grateful for the lessons they teach. Maturity emerges when you're able to look at each failure without drama, paralyzing guilt, or the need to justify yourself, recognizing that it's part of who you're becoming. And when I talk about maturity, I'm not referring to age. There are very young people who already demonstrate enormous wisdom precisely because they've learned to deal with mistakes, while others, decades older, are still trapped in guilt and regret. Maturity is when you understand that making mistakes doesn't diminish you, doesn't erase your essence, and doesn't define who you are. On the contrary, each mistake broadens your perspective on life and yourself. It's when you realize that failure isn't a sign of incapacity, but rather a reminder that you're always moving forward, trying, daring, exploring. And here comes an important point. Maturity also means taking responsibility. Those who mature don't try to hide their mistakes or shift the blame onto others, but rather look squarely at what happened and ask, what can this teach me? How can I be better from here on? This attitude of responsibility completely transforms your journey. Think about how many times you've experienced situations that at the time seemed unbearable. Those failures that hurt so much you thought you'd never get over them. Now look back. How many of them have become stories you tell with more lightheartedness, sometimes even with humor? What does this mean? That a mistake, when faced with courage, loses its weight as a wound and takes the form of wisdom. It is precisely this process that defines maturity, transforming pain into a lesson, transforming a stumble into a stepping stone, transforming failure into strength. Mature people don't run from mistakes. They face them head-on. They don't get stuck in endless regrets, but they also don't use mistakes as an excuse to keep failing in the same way. Alan Watts had a very clear vision. Life is movement, it's flux, And maturity is precisely knowing how to flow with this movement. Those who try to live, seeking a perfect, flawless path, end up becoming rigid, held back by the fear of trying. Those who mature understand that there is no life without risk, and therefore are not afraid to fall, because they know that each fall brings with it a lesson. This awareness liberates. Maturity gives lightness, because you no longer demand perfection from yourself, and at the same time it gives courage, because you understand that you can overcome any challenge. It's like learning to surf. The wave may knock you down many times, but each fall teaches you to get back up again in a different way. And this is where I want to challenge you. What mistake made you grow the most? The one that seemed like a catastrophe, but ended up making you stronger, more aware, more prepared. Write the word in the comments. Wisdom. This word is a milestone because it represents exactly what mistakes bring when you learn to deal with them. Wisdom. And sharing this here, besides reinforcing your own journey, also helps others who still carry their mistakes as heavy burdens. Showing that you've managed to turn failure into growth can be the push someone needs to see their own mistakes in a new light. There's an important detail in this process. Maturity doesn't mean settling for mistakes. It's not passively accepting that you'll fail and that's it. Quite the opposite. True maturity comes when you look at your mistakes with awareness and decide not to repeat the same patterns. It's when you understand that you can't change what happened, but you can use what you learn to make different choices in the future. It's this attitude that turns mistakes from being merely painful experiences to tools for growth. And look how this affects all areas of life. At work, a mature person doesn't hide after a failure, but learns from it and comes back better. In relationships, maturity means admitting when you've made a mistake, apologizing, and committing to acting differently. In your personal life, maturity means recognizing that bad decisions are part of life, but that each one has given you a new way of seeing the world. When you embrace this understanding, no matter how big the mistake, you know you can always use it as material for growth. The big issue is that few people reach this level because they prefer to remain trapped in perfectionism. They want to be seen as flawless, they can't tolerate failure, and they end up living a life of pretense. But true maturity has nothing to do with appearing perfect, but with being authentic. It's having the humility to acknowledge one's own failures and the courage to learn from them. Those who achieve this maturity live freer lives because they don't allow themselves to be imprisoned by other people's opinions or their own internal pressures. And here's the most powerful point. When you start seeing mistakes as a path to maturity, you gain new confidence. Not the superficial confidence of someone who thinks they'll never make a mistake, but the real confidence of someone who knows that no matter what happens, they'll be able to get back up, learn, and move on. This confidence is unshakable because it doesn't depend on the absence of failures, but on the certainty that no failure can stop you. Now you've realized how this content has opened your mind to see mistakes in a completely different way, transforming something that seemed like a burden into a true source of strength and maturity. This clarity has already begun to change the way you view your own journey, and that's why it's worth sharing this transformation. When you like and subscribe to the channel, it's not just you who wins. Others will also have the chance to access this same truth and change the course of their lives. And to mark this moment, comment here evolution. This will be your way of showing that you are not just consuming but actually applying and sharing. And look, what's coming next is even deeper. In the next video, you'll discover a point that can completely change your perception of inner freedom, something that connects everything we've discussed so far to a higher level of understanding. So leave a like, subscribe, and stay with me, because the journey is just beginning, and the next step will move you even further.